Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm going to be throwing in some resources on my Twitter, or in this talk, and I'm actually going to be posting them on Twitter through the magic of automated tweets. So as I throw out resources, you can head over there and see what I'm talking about if you don't have a chance to write them down. So there's been a little bit of a spoilers in terms of my background, and I'm going to reiterate a little bit about what I've done. So I was a designer. I have an art degree, and had an idea for a startup. This was like 6.5, maybe 7 years ago, and went through this whole process of finding a co-founder, and because I thought that that's what I had to do as a designer. I had to go find that technical co-founder. And long story short, which I can't tell here, but it's a fun story, that blew up in my face, and then I was left with the situation of either quitting everything, going back to just being a designer, or teaching myself how to code and just doing it myself. So 6 years later, Wedding Lovely is my startup. I've been running it as a solo founder, designer, developer, marketer, sales, everything at Wedding Lovely ever since then. Been working for myself, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. Then I'm also the author of Hello Web App. And when I was teaching myself Python and Django in order to launch Wedding Lovely, after I figured things out, I realized, why was it taught this way when it could be taught this way? And I waited for other tutorials to jump up and get started, and that didn't happen. So eventually I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to write my own book, teach how to do Python and Django programming. I love working on both sides of the web, being a designer and a developer. It's been awesome, and I like being able to teach designers how to program. And I think there's a really funny term when it comes to people who work on both sides. And you can say that I'm a little bit of a unicorn, which I think is hilarious, because this is the image whenever that I hear that term. So I love working on both of these paths, and I've written a book teaching programming for designers. And I've been thinking to myself, hey, can I teach or write a new book and teach design for programmers? So I tweeted this out not too long ago, just trying to think of ideas. Hear from my developer friends who've gone from development into design and what they recommended. You might be thinking here in the audience a little bit what my friends responded with, and I love them, but I'm going to shame them just a little bit. They didn't respond to my question. They said, don't learn yourself, just pay someone to do it. Don't hire a designer, just buy design templates, which is valid, but I'm a huge fan of being able to work on anything. I mean, just enough knowledge in order to be dangerous. Because as developers, you're going to have to jump into design in some way, shape, or form sometime in your life, probably. Writing a package manager like Homebrew with Grunt. All these things require a homepage and a website, and you can go out and try to pay for a designer, but you could be like me, where you try to find the right person to do it for you, and that doesn't work, so might as well do it yourself. So here, I want to go over what's the fastest way to become a better designer. So without further ado, I present to you the entire history of design principles, 1322 to 2016, abridged, otherwise known as Design in 9. So the 3 things I want you to remember if you're jumping into a design project and you want to improve your design skills. Number 1, design is not what it looks like. It looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. We had some sessions about this yesterday, and it's really awesome and very important to remember that skinning your website does nothing if your users on your website or whatever you're designing aren't achieving their goals. They aren't doing what you were hoping they would do. So worry first about how your websites and your designs and whatever you're designing, worry first about how it's working. Whenever you sit down to work on a design project, try to figure out what's that critical thing that needs to happen. Start working on analytics, work with data, but don't worry too much at start, just putting a beautiful skin on things. But number 2, visual design does play a part with how easy something is to use. So the number 1 thing I want you to remember for this is just to pay attention to clutter. We've all seen sites like this. Thank you, GoDaddy. This is pretty much the idea of a cluttery website. So all these guidelines you might have heard if you've ever looked up top principles on how to design. Things like adding a grid, using a limited number of complementary colors, use a limited number of fonts, add white space. All these principles all relate to clutter. And so by adding some of these principles to whatever you're designing, trying to line things up when you use a grid, trying to cut down your colors, that's really just cutting down the amount of clutter on your website. It's going to make it look more professional, and it's going to make it easier to use. So for example, the New York Times redesign, the left is the old, the redesigned one is on the right. And it's kind of hard to see from in these screens, but by just reducing the amount of colors they had in their website and adding a little bit more white space between the columns, the right one, the redesigned one, is less cluttery on the left, which is a huge achievement with an incredibly cluttered, a lot of information website like the New York Times. But when you're working on a website or a design, and whenever you have content, don't forget to worry about content clutter. Simplifying your headlines, making them, I talked about this in my previous talk, but you want to make sure your headlines are talking as short as possible and make sure they're talking benefits and not details. You want to reduce and simplify your paragraphs because a big, scary paragraph is a big sign of clutter. And you can break content into skimmable bits by using bullets and emphasis. And so this is kind of an example of what I mean. The left side is hard to read. You're not going to be going through it line by line unless you're truly interested in the content, which a lot of people on the web aren't. People on the web are skimmers. So if you break that paragraph out into bullets, you start highlighting the key parts of those sentences, you make the headline really easy to see, your content is going to be less cluttery and easier to read and better for the users on whatever you're designing. The last thing to remember is that great designers steal and they use shortcuts. If you sit down to design something on a blank piece of paper or just a blank Photoshop or GIMP, and without any kind of inspiration or any kind of help, it's like trying to develop without the use of Google or Stack Overflow. It is near impossible. It's way harder than it should be, and you shouldn't do that. My book, Hello Web App, I wouldn't be able to write my book without the wonderful inspiration of a book of parts books. It was an example of a well-designed tech book, very small. And if you look at my book and their book, it's pretty obvious that I was heavily inspired by what they did. I wouldn't have been able to have such a great design of Hello Web App. I didn't copy anything, but they were a huge inspiration. So if you're looking for examples for good design on the web, there's a lot of sites out there that will collect great design. You can go on there and just find things that you think are working well. Just go through and kind of train your design eye. Pick out like the white space and see what these other sites are doing, see what other people are calling as good design, and figure out what's working, and you can use that in your own designs. Again, don't copy, but emulation is totally okay. So if you go you see a website that you think is particularly awesome. Like I love the Slack website, and they're doing so many great things here. You can see that their form has this dark background behind it, and you might think to yourself, oh, that's really awesome. I'm going to have a form on my homepage, and you can do that as well. And then when it comes to shortcuts, some people don't like Bootstrap. I mean, me, as a designer, trained designer, I use Bootstrap for everything. I cannot design from scratch, and Bootstrap gives me all those design principles like a grid and some nicer typography. My Hello Web App website, my Wedding Lovely website, they're all use Bootstrap underneath. And it's a great shortcut to get you part of the way there. And there's other shortcuts like color levers. If you're not sure, like when I said before, use a limited number of complementary colors, you can go into color levers, just see what other people are liking and loving these other color palettes, and choose something for your design. You don't have to start from scratch building your own color palette. Just go on here and find something you like. The Hello Web App books, as well as Wedding Lovely, they're just color palettes I found on color levers. In terms of fonts, there's other shortcuts, because if you go on Google Fonts, there's 1.5 billion fonts, and you scroll through them, you're not sure what's good and what's not good. So there's sites out there that just mention really beautiful Google fonts, like beautiful web type and Typewolf here. So you can go on here and see what other people are saying are the best fonts and use that for your design, rather than starting from scratch. So in conclusion, I want to emphasize to you as a designer, whenever I sit down on a new design, this is my process. And if you are a new designer and you're working on something and you're thinking like, oh, this is horrible, I'm a terrible designer, I'm a horrible designer and I can't do anything. That's my process every single time. That's other designers' process. It doesn't work until the magical moment when it does work. So this is only the starting point. Remember, whenever you work on designs, make sure your goal is easy to find and use. Make sure that you're reducing visual clutter by applying some design principles like using a grid and adding white space. And remember to always practice, because the more practice you do, the better designer you're going to be. You can't just teach someone to be a developer in a day, and you can't be a designer in a day, but you can learn enough to just be a little bit dangerous. Thank you.